Hello everybody, my name's Al Beck. I'm the Director of Psychology and Psychotherapy for SLAM. I'd really like to welcome you to this series of broadcasts. You may have joined already, or this may be your first one. Really like to encourage you to help your colleagues and your those people that you work with to join up to the series, because it is an ongoing piece of work that we'd like to do, exploring the theme of psychological resilience building. As you know, most of the work of preventing the development of mental health problems and supporting people who have mental health problems takes place outside of secondary mental health care, in local communities, and with a fantastic range of different types of providers, some of whom are paid, some of whom are not paid. Most of us, when we are feeling a little under the weather, will turn to our local informal networks, and those people do a fantastic job in keeping our spirits up and building our resilience. And I want to really help us to think about how we capitalize on that. We also are exploring how psychologists and psychotherapists from a wide range of backgrounds and practices are working with local community groups to build on their strengths and to really help realise more resilient communities. And today we have an organisation, MAC UK, who will talk to us about the systems changes that are really needed to enable people to be resilient, to be their resilient selves, and how many people are just disabled by the system around them. I think what unites us all is a burning ambition to address health and social inequalities, and I know that we share that with you. And because we share that with you, I'd ask you to participate in the Q&A function, which is you'll see a little icon for that. You can click on that and you can pose questions, you can reply to questions, you can link people up with other similar organisations. If you see either posts in the Q&A or something that the speakers say triggers your imagination, please link people together. Please post links to similar organisations, and please do set up offline groups to have those conversations about how we can do this work of supporting of preventing the development of mental ill health and supporting people in local communities, and how we can bring psychological therapists into that work if necessary. I also want to get under some of the difficult questions about what has prevented health and social care systems from really doing this integration work in the past, and how we can accelerate that in the future. So questions such as, how do we ensure that interventions that people want and need and which communities can provide are properly funded and supported. So I'd ask you please to take part in the broadcast. Don't see yourselves as passive audience members. There's a Q&A function there, and we'd like to hear from you, and we'd like to be part of ongoing discussions. If you'd invite us in, that would be absolutely fantastic. So as I say, we've got two brilliant members of MAC UK who are going to introduce themselves to you. They're going to tell you about MAC UK, and hopefully you'll come away with lots of questions, lots more questions, or some questions answered, and lots more questions that you want to continue to ask. So first of all, I'll pass you over to Jessica. Would you like to introduce yourself, Jessica?
Hi, Al, thanks so much. So my name's Jess Davies, and I'm the Integrate Practitioner at MAC UK. My job is to support our partners to embed psychologically informed, co-produced ways of working with young people based on our Integrate model, which I'll talk a bit more about later. Over the years, I've worked with various marginalised communities, including refugee and asylum-seeking young people. And also from a more personal perspective, members of my own family belong to the same excluded groups that we support. And I've seen firsthand how services don't always cater to or fit those that need them. Navigating the world as a woman from the Black community myself and witnessing inequalities that my own community face has also left me committed to social justice and systems change.
Thanks, Jessica. And Jake?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting us here, Al. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's Jake Lake. I work as the Public Health and Prevention Lead for MAC UK. So what I do is develop our public health strategy, which is articulating the ways in which social and income inequality, structural oppression, racism, over-policing and under-resourcing impact working class communities across London. And to think about ways to challenge and overcome these structural barriers. I think I came to MAC through a kind of work in personal activism and working with young people in care for my whole career. What I would say is about resilience is it's a shame that communities and people have to be resilient, and I think that is something that we need to challenge as a concept, because that is kind of presupposing that something is wrong and they just need to know how to deal with it, but we'll get into it.
So thanks, Jake. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about MAC UK and what you do.
Yeah, sure. So we're a charity. MAC UK is a charity. We set up by clinical psychologists 10 years ago, working in communities, originally a music and change project working in Camden. We work in communities that are impacted by social inequality. We work alongside youth charities using elements of community psychology to support young people who are excluded and marginalised from society. We understand that we do not have the answers, rather that it is the people that living in the communities in which we work who are able to understand how best to deal with the challenges they face. We merely try and support them and help them, facilitate them to achieve what they want to achieve. Yeah, and it that involves just being there and offering whatever expertise we can, but understanding that really they are the experts in their lives.
So I'm just trying to get a kind of practical example of what that would look like on the ground, and I'm just wondering if you can tell me a little bit more about how the work of MAC UK makes a difference in the lives of young people. I don't know, Jess, could you tell me about that?
Sure. So first I'll give a bit more context to the work that I do. So I work on the Trusted Relationships Project, which is a government-funded partnership between MAC UK, an amazing community organisation called Art Against Knives, and Barnet Local Authority. And what's central to our project is the idea that trusted relationships are at the heart of reducing risk of exploitation for young people. So what we do in our project is we work alongside these partners, supporting the council, for example, to embed co-production in their practice, to make their spaces feel more safe and accessible for young people, and to cater more specifically to the communities that experience most inequality. A large part of what we do is supporting those who are already doing the work on the ground. So we work closely with the practitioners at Art Against Knives to support them in delivering their holistic wraparound service, which uses alternative methods of support to engage those that perhaps don't fit into more conventional services. So they work creatively and therapeutically through the use of music, nail art and mixed martial arts. We use traditional psychological concepts such as supervision and formulation to support and enhance their work with young people and think together through a psychological lens about young people within their wider context, including the psychological impact of the systems that they're operating within. We work collaboratively in these spaces. So there might be a social worker present, there might be a serious youth violence practitioner, but psychology is just seen as one element, and we don't privilege our knowledge over anyone else's necessarily. We see everybody as equally valuable in that space because these are the people that are working in the community and understand the needs the most. We also maintain that no one knows what they need more than the young person who's at the heart of the discussion, which is why we try to centre their voice in every possible space. And working closely with those partners also informs our wider work at MAC UK.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jessica. Can you just give me a sense of how somebody might come into these spaces that you have? How it sounds like you don't operate a referral system. How can you give me an example of how somebody might access the service or access the space, and how they might, how you're reaching the right people?
Well, so because I don't work specifically for Art Against Knives, it's hard for me to comment on their referral process. I know that there's multiple ways that at-risk young people can access the service, so whether it be through peer referrals or other professional referrals. But our work is more supporting the work that they do. So in terms of accessing the service, that people would be encouraged to approach Art Against Knives directly.
Do you mind if I just add something onto that? So obviously, MAC UK, when we started, we kind of believed that we have to meet young people where they're at. So we would often kind of just try and embed ourselves in the community, but not in a way that would kind of alienate people in the way that a lot of services might do that. So that can look like a lot of different things and is responding to the environment in which we're working.
Great. So you might be on a housing estate where people were living in poverty and at risk of violence of some kind or another, in order to make sure you're accessible. But it sounds like you've moved away from that now, and you're responding very much more to what the local community organisations tell you this might work best for them. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay. So I mean, tell me, Jake, how do you create systems change at a wider level using this kind of method?
Well, I mean, you know, it's a big question, and it's complex and multi-layered. But I think to start with, the starting point that we have to come from is that it's imperative that we understand that there are structures of hierarchy that have been designed to maintain inequalities, and those things reverberate to this day. So you have such things as boundaries of knowledge, kind of perpetuated by academia and the way that is structured. We have hegemonic control, violent enforcement of state power, that people who are excluded from society are going to be subject to. Obviously, to create systems change, fundamentally, we want to dismantle those structures of power and those systems of oppression, right? Obviously, it's extremely complicated and it requires action at a number of levels. Firstly, it is important to try and encourage systems such as psychology to recognise their role in reinforcing strategies and structures of oppression. When we pathologise individuals for responding to trauma in a certain way, we negate the legitimacy of their response and their emotions. This is to say that reform within systems is important. However, it's also necessary to identify some structures of oppression are unable, or at least unwilling, to be removed from their original intent. So until we have a world where those with lived experience of those systems of oppression are within the decision-making processes or in the decision-making positions, we will be unable to transform these structures away from their oppressive foundations. So that is to say, obviously it's kind of fashionable to talk about like user-led involvement, but we're talking about real transformative change where those hierarchies of power are dismantled.
So help me understand, and I understand what you're saying. It sounds like you would require really quite a high level systems change, you know, people to buy into the idea that we absolutely want to reduce health and social inequalities, that they would have to give up things in order to, or the rich would have to give up things in order for things to be more equitable. And you know, we may or may not be in a political system like that. But I have two questions for you. One is, do you think COVID and the experience of the pandemic has helped or hindered that? Do you think people are more aware, more socially aware, or are you seeing an opportunity for us to work more, you know, with a more community focus, a greater sense of social responsibility, a greater sense of perhaps, you know, kind of altruistic concern for others, or not? And the other thing, the other question I would have for you is, do you think that there's nothing we can do until that systems change has happened, or do you think there are actually things that we can do right now? And if so, what are the conditions that make co-production with young people in those circumstances possible, if you see what I mean? So the first question is, has COVID made us more open to systems change? And secondly, you know, what do you only work at that level, or do you also work at a local level, given that the systems change hasn't yet happened? And how do you create the conditions to truly co-produce with people?
So, I mean, I'll cover the COVID-19 question. I don't know. I mean, it's a bit of a cliche to say it, but you know, clearly things change drastically quite quickly, and that is something that we as a society haven't necessarily seen, you know, before, or at least not in my lifetime. I think that shows that things can be done quickly and things can change at a high level. However, what I would also say is that the rich and the powerful will do anything to guard their lot, unless COVID-19 being the thing that has kind of facilitated or nurtured the environment where systems change is possible, but more so the latest iteration of police violence, and the latest iteration of the Black Lives Matter movement that has galvanized young people and working class people across London, across the country and across the world, that are demanding that the powerful no longer operate in the way that they do. I don't know that COVID is something that has made that easier or harder. I think it would be impossible and maybe like kind of you know, idiotic of me to try and claim knowledge to.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jake. And this sense of how you co-produce, how do you keep the patient or the service user or the member of the community, or, you know, the person at the centre of the work? How do you make sure that we're not distracted by? So how do you co-produce? How do you co-produce in that in this context, or is it all about systems-wide change, Jessica?
Well, to be honest, the two are extremely linked. I don't think there's a binary at all. Co-production is a huge part of systems change, and it's, you know, it's kind of at the lowest level what we can all be striving for day to day. We do that at MAC in lots of different ways. So something that we always try to do is keep the youth voice in our mind in every space that we enter. So whether it be a meeting with the local authority, whether it be engaging with the police, it's something that we always try to do within our minds. But we also physically invite young people into spaces where possible, and obviously that has been difficult during this COVID period, but it's something that we're really keen to do more of. But it's also about making those spaces safe and accessible for young people, so making changes ahead of their involvement so that they don't feel alienated, or the feelings that they felt before are just recreated in those spaces, because then it's counterproductive. So and another thing that we think is really important in trying to even out the power structure is paying young people for their participation. So we don't see it as a favour, we see it as an equally valuable contribution with the things that they would bring. And we really encourage it in every possible way. And if we feel as though there are questions that we have that we don't have the answers to, rather than feeling, you know, oh, perhaps we shouldn't tackle this, we would go to the young people, because realistically they're the ones who hold the answers for us.
And do you help? So I'm aware, Jake, that you said that your background was working with looked after children, and I always have a long history of working with looked after children myself, and it's an area very close to my heart. And I wonder about, and yet it's a group of people who we see overrepresented, obviously, in secondary mental health care, but for many reasons that you know, overlay with that, I guess. I wonder about what work you can do to help people in situations like that, which are so incredibly challenging, to really make connections themselves, and to what extent you feel that you know, that you have to be realistic with them about what's possible.
I would say, well, I mean, my immediate reaction to that is that you have to listen to them and understand them, understand where they're coming from, understand that people in those situations might be in pain, or will, you know, are in pain, and that pain is a legitimate thing. I think in all my work where I've worked with young people in care, they have experiences of mental health services where they feel patronised, they feel like they are told how to think, they are told how they should feel, they are experiencing relationships where there is a power dynamic in which they are subject to power rather than having power themselves and having autonomy. Every single young person that I've worked with, no matter how traumatized, in fact, it's almost irrelevant, like their trauma. Every single person that I've worked with who might have experienced kind of extreme levels of sexual violence have always been some of the most insightful, intelligent people that I've ever met. So I've always found it hard, not as a trained psychologist, because I'm not. I've found it harder to relate to the mental health professionals that I've worked with than I have with the young people. And I don't know, maybe I've got something in me that is deficient, but that I don't think that that's the case. You know, I think that there is something within those systems that makes people feel small and insignificant, and I think that's a real problem.
Yeah, so maybe I didn't get my point, my question right. I think I'm sure you're right. I'm sure that the ways in which we need to work are different. But I also think that the opportunities, we know that the opportunities for children who leave the care system are profoundly worse than for children who grow up in families of their own, of their birth families. There are profound challenges endemic in the system. So it's about how do you co-produce with people and give them hope in a context in which you feel that the system is so likely to let them down. I don't mean to overly focus on that particular population, but it's a good example because the statistics are so extraordinarily poor. The outcome is so extraordinarily poor.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try and be really quick with this because I know we're running out of time. I'm conscious that I'm answering this over you here, Jessica. Sorry. well, firstly, their outcomes are poor because young people in care are over criminalized and are pathologized. So that by nature of them being in a system, they are dealt with in a certain way that they wouldn't be dealt with if they were within their biological families. So that is something that is kind of endemically wrong with the whole notion of young people being in care. How I co-produce is, I mean, I'm going to shamelessly plug a project that I am working on, which is a podcast called Transforming Care. And in that way, and it's the same way that MAC UK work, we pay young people to participate, to express themselves and listen to what they have to say and pay attention to what their experiences. I would say that and help, and then give them the power to design services.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. And I'm going to look up your podcast on transforming care. That sounds fantastic. You know, what are the next steps, Jessica? How is this going to move forward? I think you've made a great case for both the systems level work, for the co-produced individual level work, for how you instill hope, and your enthusiasm is obvious. But what are the next steps?
Well, again, that's a very good question, and it's also a very big question, but I'll try to do what I can. So the NHS's long-term plan in tackling health inequality is suggested that we be innovative. So it's not enough to just be talking about these things. We need to be doing things. So we do need to think about tangible things that we can do. So at the moment, psychological interventions aren't listening enough and learning from the communities, you know, and this is what Jake and I have been saying, that we're trying to serve. So I know, again, we talk about involving people with lived experience, but there needs to be more recognition and equal value placed upon all of the different forms of expertise. So there are individuals out there who are living through the situations that we're trying to improve. So it doesn't make sense why they haven't been involved sooner. They can tell you what they need. We don't need to tell you what they need, and their voices really need to be privileged in order for there to be equity. There are community organisations who are already doing amazing work, preventative work, but again, not enough weight is placed upon their expertise, especially if they're smaller organisations. So it's possible to reach out and to connect with these organisations and to pay them for their expertise. And like we said, to invite young people to co-produce services. I also think it's really important that although I understand how restricted certain spaces are, that we consider things on kind of a smaller but also broader level as well. So if we think about CAMS, for example, so the way I understand it, that if a young person misses an appointment, one or two appointments, they're discharged from the service. But a tangible, practical way to kind of think about change that can be made is asking ourselves why that person might have missed that appointment. Why is it that somebody who's in distress has missed the opportunity potentially to feel better? Could it be that those spaces don't feel accessible or safe for them? Could it be that they feel too oppressive or too formal? Could it be based on a past experience that they had where they didn't feel understood? Or maybe the intensity or the power dynamic of a one-to-one session? I think the responses that young people give us, even if they're completely silent in their responses, tell us the things that we need to do, and that's what we need to pay attention to. Yeah, I could go on, but I won't.
Well, maybe I'll prompt you to go on a little bit more. So something about, you know, here we have the opportunity, I think, of Black Lives Matter having a profile that I've not known in my lifetime, and an opportunity to tackle, you know, institutional racism, to develop anti-racist practice. How are you going to facilitate, and know that you've facilitated, anti-racist practice and challenge some of these institutional barriers to people being able to truly say what they think and feel?
Well, I think, to be honest, I think we're operating at the moment in quite a vicious cycle. So if we think back to the CAMS example that I just gave, that in itself perpetuates institutional racism, in the sense that there's only a certain, perhaps, section of the population who are being afforded trauma diagnoses, and other people are perhaps having their responses seen as inherently aggressive or inherently violent. So I think at the moment that's something that's being perpetuated with the way that our services operate. I think in terms of ensuring, wait, can you repeat what you said? It was a long question.
Oh, it was a long question, and we've only got 1 minute to answer it in, but it's really about how you know you've done it. How do you know you're doing it? How do you know that you're reaching that group of people, that you're enabling people to really to be able to speak? And I think maybe you're saying something about the outcomes would go down, that we wouldn't be overly detaining Black people under the Act. We would be, but perhaps you were wanting to say something else.
Well, no, it is that, but what I will say is I don't think we're ever going to truly have a moment where we feel like, yes, this has been ticked off. I think it's really hard to have, you know, a short-term goal of ending racism or ending institutional racism, and I think that the sort of transformative justice and change that we're talking about is something that is going to take years, and that's something that we accept in our work. I think that, as Jake mentioned earlier, it's about doing things on multiple levels. So at the level directly with young people, but also until the power balance is more equal, using the privilege and the authority that psychology holds to enter into spaces and get these voices in there, in order to elevate the voices of the excluded people.
Well, you've been absolutely brilliant. You've been a fantastic speakers. Thank you so much, Jake Lake and Jessica Davis from MAC UK. And I'd encourage the audience to keep signing up to our series, keep continuing these conversations. And if you want to contact MAC UK, we can send you the link, or you can access it through their website by Googling them. Okay, thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.